Muted.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank everybody for joining the call. My name is Matthew McGuire. I'm a solutions consultant with Digitek, and I'm going to be co-hosting today's webinar with Rob. Just a little housekeeping as we start. At the end of the call, we're going to be announcing a giveaway for a $50 Amazon gift card. So after Rob and everybody wraps up, I'll make just a quick announcement of the winner, and then we can contact you afterwards and send you the information. Digitek's Thought Leadership webinar series features today's hottest growth topics. When we were designing this and bringing this to the industry, what we have now is every month we're going to bring together a guest speaker and a subject matter expert that has that expertise and experience to bring us the important information and market trends that we all need to grow our businesses. Today's webinar is titled The SMB's Path to the Private Cloud, the Right Road for Your Business. Where we're going to discuss today is the trends and influences that are driving today's SMBs when they're addressing their choices for IT solutions, whether that's on-prem or cloud services and the providers they work with. Today's guest speaker is Rob McCormick. Rob is the CEO of Avatara out of St. Louis. Rob founded Avatara in 2005 with the goal of bringing enterprise-level IT solutions to the SMB space. Prior to forming Avatara, Rob was the chairman and CEO of Savvis Communications, where he led that company from their initial IPO to over a global network, almost $1 billion in revenue. So I'm pretty sure we got the right guy for the call. With that very brief intro, Rob, we look forward to hearing today's discussion. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, great. Appreciate the introduction and welcome everybody. So today we're going to talk a little bit about, we're going to cover a little bit of history, how did IT get to where it is, talk about what is causing problems and struggles for small and mid businesses, and then also what their options are moving forward to get out of a traditional IT mode. So if we, sorry, I'm waiting for, there we go. So we're going to go through kind of three basic sections in the presentation. How did we get to where we are today? And that's a very interesting topic on its own. How did we end up from the mainframe world with this ad hoc, on-premise IT solution that almost all mid-sized companies have and many large ones? What are the problems with the available public cloud offerings? A lot of people are trying to move to public cloud to get away from their on-prem IT, and then what's the best way to solve those problems as well? So diving right into it. On this slide, I'm not sure how long anybody on the phone has been around, but in the old days, which were the 80s, corporate computing was very predictable and very limited. Centralized mainframe-based computing, it doesn't seem like that long ago. Green screens and very predictable outcomes, meaning the terminal was always there, it always worked. A very few number of people actually needed the data, and so the problems of IT were pretty siloed. Over time, as the world moved to move the application functionality out to the end users, you migrated in a less than engineered technical fashion to this broadly distributed use of compute, where today, that information that used to have to sit at your desk or dial into your green screen to get at, people want on every device everywhere. So as they have moved toward this new environment where data is available everywhere, what happens is the complexity is dramatically increased over where we were before. And so although they've got access to the data, which is very important to the business, the infrastructure that operates that doesn't really keep up with the criticality of the actual information. And so as they've now moved to tablets and devices, and they want to be able to be at dinner and be able to look up financials, be able to handle customer orders, all of those things have led to mid-sized businesses looking for ways to adapt their current infrastructure. It's no longer just about email and some files. It's about all of their business data available everywhere. Tie into that also, disaster recovery and all of the other things, and you've got a pretty complicated technical problem. So real briefly, in a pictorial fashion, originally compute was pretty simple. You had a data center. It was very high availability, it was very secure, you didn't have to worry about somebody stealing your mainframe. And then you had a very dumb network to very dumb terminals in your offices. And so if you think about that, very small number of components and also very high availability components. So you don't have to worry about it takes 7 things in a chain to make things show up on my terminal. over time, as you started with, PCs on the desktop that accessed the mainframe, then you started with departmental servers, then you ended up with email and ERP systems, all of the other things that got developed over time, you ended up with an architecture that's very, very complicated. So now, in order to make that email show up on the CEO's phone, the guy that owns a mid-sized business with his 100 employees, there's lots of things that have to work. And because none of those things are as available as the enterprise level systems like the mainframes, it causes them to have way more outages than they want to, and the length of those outages is longer because there's no flashing red light on a screen that tells their IT guy, what went wrong. And so from a logical architectural perspective, there are many, many things wrong with the way systems are built today, and all of the mid-sized businesses are in this kind of environment because they don't have the capital to invest in what looks like a more enterprise solution. That's pretty bad in the first place, but then if you look at what's actually running that, a lot of them look something like this, right? So if you walk into a manufacturing firm, a small hospital, a bank, and you say, show me your IT, they will take you to a closet and they will show you something that looks like this, where every little box in here and every cable hanging out, and some of them are a little cleaner than this, but by the way, not many. That is an opportunity for it to be down. The other thing is, if you have, from a disaster recovery perspective, if you have an environmental problem in this room, you have something catch on fire, God forbid, or water or anything else, your system is down and it's not coming back anytime soon. And so all of those things from a physical perspective yield low availability, high cost, and lack of functionality. And this next slide, we put in, it's a little bit funny, but in the end, it's not all that funny. This is the guy that's running that stuff, and that's not always fair from an optical perspective. But in the end, you tend to have a jack of all trades running the IT systems in these companies. They can't afford to have a system architect, a database expert, a network expert, a security expert. The 5 or 6 different silos that you would have to have, very expensive people operating your systems to make sure that you are secure, that you're doing backups, that you're on top of the latest software trends. They just can't afford that. So what they have is typically either self-taught or fairly low-level break-fix types that are operating the environment and searching things on the forums to figure out what's wrong with their systems. So they can't have a dedicated person for each of the types of things they need to do. If you think about it, that's pretty obvious why that is. If you're running an architecture firm, right, having an IT guy that's a really expensive system architect, he's going to be bored. You're not going to want to pay him what he'd want to get paid. And even if you did, he's not going to be doing software upgrades and other system upgrades on a daily basis. So he's going to lose touch with his technology. The other way around, as an IT company, you would not have an architect on staff to redo your bathroom every couple of years, because A, you wouldn't want to pay him, and B, he wouldn't want the job. So you end up with this. It's so complex and needs so much capability that it's very hard to bring that in-house. If you get past that, you have things like backups and disaster recovery. In order to do a real backup and a real restore test, you have to have redundant servers. You have to have all sorts of other components. And so the typical backup model is either electronically send stuff offsite, or many people still have tapes. And the problem with the tapes is unless you try and restore the tapes, you don't really know if you have a good backup. And so we're just kind of running through some of the issues that the current architecture has. The final one that I'll just touch on briefly, but is a big deal for everybody, is this whole capital refresh model. And so you buy a system that has X storage, X server capacity, and your business grows faster than you thought, your storage needs grow faster than you thought, but you've got a system that only has a certain amount of storage. And so you have to go out and forklift upgrade things to keep up. Or the other side of the equation, which we see all the time, is people who just don't have the capital and the stuff is very, very old and starting to get pretty brittle. Anyway, because of this kind of disposable capital model, you have a business CapEx cycle that is really harmful to the mid-business. So after now a couple of thought slides, really the issues with the on-prem, buy it yourself, operate it yourself system are in these areas. You have security issues, which we'll dive into a little bit. Availability, very low availability overall. Accessibility, meaning how do I get at my data from everywhere? What's my business continuance plan? And overall, because you own this stuff and you're trying to operate it, the costs tend to be pretty high for what you get. On the security side, we talked the other day with a law firm, and one of the partners said, well, I'd like to have my data here where I can see it. they're in an office building, the janitor has the key to the office, the password for the server is on a post-it note on the server, and so moving that data to a SSAE 16 certified data center with physical security cameras, all of the types of things that you would have in an enterprise level system is clearly a benefit. But you have to get past the fact that it's not in his closet doesn't mean that it's not secure. As a matter of fact, it's way more secure. Electronic security, these guys can only afford local branch level type physical devices, whether it be your firewall or your antivirus systems. When you move toward a hosted system, you get access to enterprise level technology without having to pay for it yourself. And then the whole control thing, again, you have an external IT guy who maybe it's on a time and materials basis that has everybody's passwords. Having a contractual relationship with a provider where you have confidentiality and auditability is something that's very important these days with the number of break-ins that are happening. On the availability side, if you think about the things that can break, do you have 1 or 2 firewalls? Do you have 1 or 2 LAN switches? Do you have redundant servers? Do you have redundant storage systems? As you go through those systems that operate the 100-user company, they have very little redundancy. And the same is true on the network side. So there are any number of things that can fail and have the whole site down, and by the way, all their counterparties, if it's the access to their server, think that they're offline for a significant period of time. If you were to lose a main corporate server at most of these companies that had their email on it, you're not talking about hours of downtime, you're talking about days and sometimes longer. And so the risk that they're running and just the overall availability tends to be very, very low. Facility dependence. If your office is also where you're hosting all of your stuff and there's a problem with that building, it's not just your internal people that can't work, all of your counterparties think that you've gone away as well. And because you've lost your email server, you don't have a whole lot of way to communicate with them. So losing the dependence on the physical facility is something that they're trying to do. And the same with staff dependence. If you have, let's say you have a very good internal IT guy, you're not going to have 2 or 3 if you're a 50 or 100 person company. And so that person, if they happen to leave, how do you get the knowledge out of them about your system? So you're tying yourself to a lot of single-threaded resources, whether they be facilities, technical resources, or staff resources. From an accessibility perspective, you want to get at that data anywhere, anytime. So whether you're on the road and want to get at a desktop application, or you just need access to some files, or you want your email, having that stuff in a closet in the building, even if it's a nice closet, means you're dependent on all of that being running in order to get access to your stuff remotely, and that's true for your counterparties as well. The other problem is that typically you're not going to have a big bidirectional redundant pair of fiber connections into your office building, and so the pipe itself is typically not very big and not very available, but the people now that are getting broadband, it's also the wrong direction. So if you think about it, you have a 100 meg cable connection, that's 100 meg towards your desktops. The other directions where when you're outside the building you want to pull the data, and that's going to be 10 meg, so it's going to be typically 1/10 of the downstream. So a lot of people are using broadband to get more bandwidth. If that's also your hosting site, that turns out to not be a very good answer. And then the night shutdown problem, as we call it, if you don't leave your desktops on under your desk and you're using some remote access or VPN method to get access to your data from home or from the hotel or on the road, you're out of luck because there's nobody there to turn it back on. And that's the same as if the cleaning crew comes in and turns off your desktop onto your desk. So having your equipment somewhere where you're sure that it's always going to be on and always available is a huge business advantage over the current physical hardware model. Business continuance, if the building were to have a fire, what's your plan, right? And so for a manufacturing firm, they have to worry about the plant, but what if the fire was just up front where all of the order processing and billing people are? Can you get stuff back up and running, bill your customers, keep your cash flow going, or are you going to be out of business because it took you too long to do that? Now, we had an experience with actually a private school that had a fire in the building. It literally burned down the entire front half of the building, including all of their IT systems. But because they were on a cloud platform, they were able to the next day be up and running at a different location, emailing all their constituents and making sure that the school was communicating with their counterparties. If you're dependent on the actual physical facility to make that happen, it's a problem. And that's the same with recovery and restoral. If you don't have the exact copy of your hardware, you can't restore your tapes to test a recovery because you're going to restore them to your production server, and obviously that doesn't make any sense. Almost none of these folks have if they have one $20,000 server, they're not going to buy another one just to do a recovery test every once in a while. So tying yourself to those physical assets makes it very, very difficult to have a tested and trustworthy backup and business continuance plan. And then finally, on the cost side, what you see is this increasing exponentially storage demand, regulation, all of the other things. So a good example in the civil engineering space, they're now doing projects where they can generate a terabyte of data a month, where it used to be a terabyte was the whole last 30 years. And so as that curve goes exponential and they have regulatory requirements around data retention, they need to keep the project files for 10 years. In HIPAA, you need to keep the medical records. In education, they all have these overlying regulatory reasons for keeping files in storage for a long period of time in a dependable way. And that's just very expensive, if not impossible, to do in the on-prem storage systems. Also in the regulatory space, there are lots of security standards and other things that you have to cover. And more, if you're a 50-person, even law firm, healthcare facility, it is practically impossible to do that on site. And so they're looking for ways to get out of those problems with the third-party regulators. None of that is helping their business. It's just an additional cost. And so as you're selling to the mid-business market, understanding that these costs from regulation and change in their market are burying them, and they still don't have the money to even refresh their base infrastructure. So they're looking at an untenable situation where they can't afford what they need to do, yet they will be in violation of the regulatory requirements if they don't. Increasingly, the data access is complicated. It used to be, again, that you wanted to find a PDF file or some email. People want now online access to all of their data systems, their data analysis, and so all of that requires a much more complicated back-end system, heavily server-based, heavily SQL data-based, and all of that requires different kinds of talent to operate your system. So when you have a SQL data warehouse, that's very different than a file server that the local IT guy used to run, and how do you make sure that that thing is operating properly? And that leads you down to the bottom of this list, which is the availability of IT talent. Where do you go find a guy, assuming he wanted to work for you and assuming that you could pay him, that understands all of this stuff and can really help you make your business move forward? One of the reasons people look for outside services is to find access to that IT talent, which is really not what they do. If you're in the business of making missiles for Boeing, IT isn't what you do, but Boeing is forcing you to be an IT expert. And that is true of a lot of these mid-sized guys who have larger customers. So what's happened over the last 20, 30 years or so is all on this chart. So what happened in the beginning was you had the mainframe, and the mainframe was very low cost and very low functionality, but extremely high availability and very high utilization of your capital asset. People didn't like the fact that they didn't have the functionality. They didn't have good applications, and they didn't have good access to the actual data itself. And so client server came along. People said, well, we could just let's get around those corporate IT guys. We'll put in the corporate departmental server. We'll start to put little apps. I don't remember Lotus Notes and all of those fun things. So what happened was compute very quickly decentralized. But decentralized, although it fixed the two problems they were trying to fix, it broke the availability and utilization functions. And so you have expensive compute all over the place, poorly utilized, and low availability. What you can do with real private cloud systems is optimize all of those points. And that's what people are looking for. They want to pay for what they need. They want it to be high availability. They want to get out of the complexity business. So that led them towards looking at cloud-based services. So, the first thing people look at, and everybody's familiar with things like Office 365, is, are there public cloud services that I can take parts of my system and farm it out to? So you got some of the ideas on here. Obviously, Office 365 is a common one where you can go put your email and potentially your SharePoint out there. The Barracuda and those type of guys handle security side of things. There are all sorts of different email providers. There are ASPs, so vertical application vendors like Salesforce.com, and all of these offer a solution to a small piece of the IT problem. The problem that we've run into, though, is that if you head down that path, you have some very significant issues. The first is that to solve the full IT problem for a mid-sized business, you need 7, 8, 9, 10 of these guys, right? So you're going to have your email hosted here. You're going to have this other guy that's handling your security. You're going to have somebody else that's doing backups. And so you end up with a non-integrated solution with lots of different vendors. more importantly than that, the biggest problem in enterprise IT typically is the desktop, right? Those desktop PCs, they break, they have application problems, that's where the viruses happen, that's where the breaches happen a lot of the time, and so the whole public cloud world doesn't really touch that desktop very much. There are people that will give you cloud-based desktops, but they're completely separate from where the rest of your system is, so that doesn't typically work very well at the mid and large mid business size. In the enterprise space, they can glue that stuff together with their internal IT guys and tend to be able to utilize a little bit better. The loss of control, a lot of these vendors out there are, you can email them, but you can't really talk to them, and so you don't have this guy that you can go say, hey, this isn't working, I need it fixed right now. And then reliability. There have been a lot of issues there. So just to jump through these quickly, so if you have your email somewhere, your backup, your storage, your applications, all of those things with different vendors, A, it's complicated to manage, but B, what happens when your application that's hosted one place needs to deal with your email server that's hosted somewhere else? And how are you going to communicate that and make it all happen? It turns out to be a really big problem as the software systems get more complex. The fact that you're ignoring the desktop is a real issue. So if you take all of your stuff out of your comm closet and outsource it to these public cloud services, but still have your PCs at your site, and you have a business application that wants to talk to a SQL server, for example, the application wants to be where the server is. And so having that network separation is a real problem. And also having those applications running on computers under your desk is a problem for access and also performance. On the vendor side, if you think about, let's say you have a spam problem and you're on Office 365, you can certainly email Microsoft and they may answer you, but you certainly don't have the kind of control you have over your own system where you can tune all of your parameters and have a real discussion with a vendor about what's critical to your business and having it work. So you're thrown in the same pond with a whole bunch of other people, and they don't have any real loyalty to any of you specifically. And that's true whether it be Microsoft or Amazon or Google or any of these cost-effective, if you will, public shared cloud solutions. Updates and patches, you'll have at a shared email hosting company a giant email server with 100,000 mailboxes on it. You don't get to say when mailboxes are going to get upgraded to the new version of Exchange. They're just going to do that. They're going to tell you when the maintenance window is, and it's going to happen. So if it interferes with something important going on in your business, you don't have any way around that. The other thing, the opposite of that is they don't have any idea who you are or what you do, right? What they know is you're a mailbox and you're paying them $10 a month for each mailbox. So they don't really understand that your mailbox has different stuff in it than somebody else, and they don't really care. And so because you are one of many, there's really no prioritization of your issues versus anybody else. And the more people dabble with those large company public services, whether it be the Dropbox or the ShareFile or any of the others, they find out pretty quickly that you're kind of getting what you pay for with those guys. So who has access to your data? From a security perspective, there are a lot of regulations now that require you to sign on the dotted line that say you know where your data is, you're controlling access to it, and if anything gets breached, you're liable. And so if you have your email out at Microsoft or Google, who really has access to that, and how can you be contractually responsible for that? If you have shared file storage at Dropbox, for example, how do you know who has access to that, and how can you prove it? And for a lot of the newer requirements, the Defense Department especially, and now starting to get into HIPAA, they require you to know where it is physically. And so it's very hard when you're using these shared data services, all the way down to email journaling, for example, that you know where it is, what vendor it is. And by the way, for ITAR, you have to also certify that only American citizens have access to it. So there's a bunch of these standards that are pushing people to pull stuff back in that had already tried to push it out. And so there's an opportunity there from a sales perspective. And then reliability, you think if it's Google or Microsoft or Amazon, they're going to be highly available. Well, if you were to pay attention to what goes on out in the space, all of them have had major, whole or half country outages in the last year. And the communication when that happens is they post it on a message board saying we're aware of the problem and we'll let you know when it's fixed. Well, if your whole company is down for a day while they're working on that, then you have some real issues because you don't really have any visibility to it. And then when it's finished, they'll kind of give you an idea as to what happened, but no assurances it's not going to happen again, and actually no credits or anything else because that's just not the way that those services are set up. And so there's no view into how your infrastructure is laid out, so you can analyze what is my risk, what is my downside here, what are the potential outages that I have to think about. So as you go through all of that, what has cropped up are a set of services that kind of take the idea of, I don't want to own this, I want somebody else to run it for me, and put it together with the control that you had on the internal asset-based model, and come up with a solution that gives you the best of both worlds. And so when we review the on-premise solution, right, the best features there, you could control it. You knew where it was, and that was the senior law partner says, well, I know where it is, and I know who's touching it, and I can yell at them, and that means it's going to get fixed. But you're giving up a lot in that model for that level of accountability. You know where your data is. That's important too. There's really not a lot of other benefits to having it yourself other than this illusion of control. Why did you go look at public cloud? Well, because you're trying to fix those other problems. I need scalability. I need to be able to add a terabyte of data without redoing my whole architecture. I need to add a whole bunch of server capacity. I need to have the reliability of an enterprise data center. I need to know that my data is physically secure. And the most important thing we haven't talked about too much is I would prefer to consume things on a subscription-based model, meaning I pay for what I use every month, and if my business demands change, I can change that. There are people out there that will sell you private cloud with air quotes around it, but what they really mean is they've taken some equipment, they've sold it to you, and they put it in a rack in a data center. And what I always tell people is if you can point to an asset that you own, you're buying cloud. You're buying stuff that you're putting somewhere else, which is really the same as on-premise. It's just a slightly better location to put it, but you're stuck with all the same asset control models that you were before. So the idea is look for a solution where you can consume things on a subscription-based model, but get guaranteed private resources for your business, have the control that you want, meaning I can talk about when the operating system is going to get upgraded. I can talk about when the maintenance windows would be. And so you're looking for a combination of the old own your own asset model and some of what the public cloud services bring you, but with the benefits of both. And so one option there is a product that we have, and that is to build these private cloud infrastructures, but not in the model that most of the hosting companies do, in a model where although assets are dedicated to you and your business, you're buying it all on a subscription basis that's very abstract. So you're decoupling the economic model, where people really like that pay-by-the-user, low-cost model of public cloud, from the deployment model, where people really like I'd really rather have the hardware in my closet so I know what the heck I have. You combine all those things together, and what you have is something that solves all of the data points in both ends of the equation. And so, things to look for. You don't want to be in the hardware ownership business, right? And that in a real outsourced private cloud model should include the stuff that would have been in the LAN closet, which is now servers and things like that in the data center. It should include things like your network firewalls, your security appliances. It should include your Microsoft licensing, so SQL servers. It should include all the storage, all the way out to desktop hardware. All of that is an asset that is IT-centric, has nothing to do with the core business, and is something that you don't want to be investing your money in. Software, as I mentioned, getting on the software chain with Microsoft is a complicated thing, and so there are two problems with that. One is it's expensive and complicated to keep your licensing up. So whether it be, what kind of SQL licensing do I need for this new application? What do I have to do for my file server? The licensing models that Microsoft have are complicated. The other part is there's a large liability here. If you are providing your own licensing and Microsoft comes and calls you and says, we'd like to come look at your licensing, it is the only other thing that I'm aware of that's like the IRS, where you're guilty until proven innocent. You need to prove to them then that you have appropriate licensing for every end user, whether you did it on purpose or not. So if you move to these hosted models that are subscription-based, that licensing burden falls upon the service provider, and so it's a removal of liability for the business, and it's also typically a cost savings. So connectivity, anybody who's ever had to deal with AT&T or Comcast or Time Warner when they have issues with the connectivity to one of their sites knows that unless you speak their language and know how to get around that level 1 guy who just wants you to reboot your computer, it can be very difficult to handle. And how do you know when it's time to upgrade, when it's time to get more bandwidth for less money, when there is another provider available? So if the connectivity both in and out of the data center and at your local sites can be bundled into the service, there's a huge benefit there. When you add voice into that, there's an even bigger benefit, because a lot of people are trying to figure out how do I do IP voice, and is it going to work on the circuit I have? All of that turns out to be a lot more complicated than the VoIP vendors will tell you, and therefore you end up with, you buy a system and it doesn't really work, but they'll say, again, as we talked about earlier, well, you know, the hosted voice is working, it must be the internet provider. If you're the one that's managing the internet provider, you better know how to argue between those two, or you're going to end up with phones that don't work for a long period of time. On the support side, you know, can you call somebody and talk to them when you have a problem, right? And are they people that understand your whole business or just a part of it? And are you the one that is the intermediary between three different technical outside providers and letting them and facilitating the argument between them as to whose problem it is? The more you can get to a single contact for everything, the more you can understand that you're not going to end up with problems that go on for a long period of time where vendors are fighting with each other and you're the one that's got the problem. Because again, in a lot of these point solution public cloud type things, there are no real service level agreements where, unless they can prove it was their problem, and they can always prove that it was somebody else's problem. So having a support number that you can call where they will answer, they will talk to you, and they will help you solve your problem turns out to be fairly uncommon in the cloud space. And so using virtual desktops, you can also pull the desktops back into the data center as well, where you have these always-on cloud desktops attached to always-on server infrastructure, and a subscription pricing model where you pay monthly per user and don't worry about how much storage it is, how many servers I have, what's my Microsoft licensing look like. That's a product sales model that has been used for years. The idea here is to abstract people away from that so that they can really think about who are my users, and I'm just going to have somebody take care of the infrastructure for them. And it is something that both economically and technically is possible with today's technology. So to summarize, you know, you started over the years going from a really predictable, cost-effective model with centralized computing. We moved to a highly distributed model. The world is trying to move back to a centralized in a data center model, but the solutions that are out there tend to have some serious problems because either they only address a part of the infrastructure, or they're so broad for so many types of people that they don't directly address the specific problems that you have. And so this hybrid idea where you can have private infrastructure sold as a cloud-based pricing model dedicated to you solves both of those problems at the same time. So, you know, while we are, you know, kind of industry knowledgeable, obviously we have a product of our own that we think meets those requirements. We have a channel partner program. The contacts on this slide are for that. And with that, why don't we move on to some questions?
Sorry. Hi, guys. This is Matt again. Hey, thank you so much, Rob. Jennifer, I know that I saw a bunch of the questions kind of coming in on the side there. Did we have any questions that were kind of trending that you saw that maybe we could throw Rob's way?
Yes. Give me one moment. I'm going to quickly go through these. Okay, yes. So Rob, many people are saying many of my customers have rigorous security needs based on industry requirements. How would you address this?
So although in every vertical there are different security requirements, you know, we have customers that are hospitals, we have customers that are defense contractors. As we said, we have, you know, law firms, financial advisors, people with credit cards. So every one of those verticals has their own, you know, security umbrella, whether it be HIPAA or ITAR or any of the others. And you start with the basic premise that what are you doing today and how is this better, right? So step one is don't leave the keys in the car. You know, if your stuff is in a closet in your office building, you know, probably being in a secure data center is better for any of those security standards. If you unwind all those security standards, they end up at the same place. You have to have physical security, you have to have logical data security, and then you have processes on top of those, which are then company processes that are people-based. And so by moving to this kind of a solution, regardless of which of those security umbrellas it is, you're dramatically enhancing your ability to comply with these, you know, fairly broad-reaching standards. Most of them do not specify exactly what you have to do to comply. They just ask that you say that you are going to make sure that the data is secure, and then you get paid the penalty at the end when it doesn't work out for you. And so, you know, we see it as a risk mitigation. We go into with each of the types of customers and basically you replace the bottom part of their compliance stack with this highly engineered solution from a physical, logical, and policy area. So you take 90% of the problem off the table, and then for each vertical, there's a little bit of employee process that goes on top of that. So our particular approach is an interactive one. Again, something we do that you wouldn't get from an Amazon or a Microsoft, where we help them tailor their individual compliance processes and documentation to fit in with the complete cloud platform on the back. And so, A, you're going to take a lot of the risk off the table just because, and B, because we do have a custom system for every end customer, we're able to customize processes to fit into their particular compliance umbrella.
Hey, Rob, this is Matt again. There's a question here that I'm seeing a couple times, but more importantly, selfishly, I want to know the answer. And it's around bring your own device. You mentioned earlier on the call, you know, that end user client today, they have an increased demand for access to data, and they have an increased demand for the data itself and how to get at it. How are you guys seeing bring your own device come into the play with IT solutions and security?
It's actually a really good question. There's several components to it, and security and access to applications are two pretty broad areas. You know, if you think about it, folks used to have all of their enterprise applications on their desktop PC, right? So typically most enterprise applications only run on Windows. You know, they don't have a Mac version of AutoCAD, for example, at least not Civil 3D. And so while people might have at home a Macintosh, they might have an iPad, they have all these different devices, none of the applications would run on those devices. And so by taking the PC that would have been under your desk and making it a virtual PC in the data center where all of your applications are, you can then transparently, using standard remote access tools that are part of our product, for example, access the view of that desktop from any device. And so you can be, I've had civil engineering customers show it at big seminars where they can sit there on their iPad and call up, you know, the sewer designs for a new subdivision in Autodesk Civil 3D very easily on an iPad without the giant graphics system under their desk. And so being able to access all of your applications, all your data by looking at your desktop remotely is the best way to solve that problem. And what it does let you use is any device, anywhere. You don't even have to have a real PC at the office to access it. You can have a thin client, you can use your own laptop. And the ancillary part to that is, you know, when people had laptops, they typically were mobile desktops. They'd have a docking station at the office. That laptop would be part of the corporate domain because that's the only way they could get remote VPN to work. You take your laptop with you, you VPN in, and all your applications are still installed locally. I hope that makes sense. And so if you think about how this changes that whole model, that desktop no longer has any of the applications installed on it. It also no longer has any data on its C drive. So what's one of the things you read in the paper all the time? Somebody had the laptop, they lost it at the airport, and suddenly a whole bunch of medical records are out there, a whole bunch of financial records. In our model and in the private cloud model, all of that data stays in the data center. The only thing that's leaving the data center is a view of that data center-based desktop that then gives you access to everything you need. So you can literally take a brand new device of any type, spend a couple minutes setting it up and have access to your desktop and have no risk that your enterprise data is going to end up on that mobile device. So A, the business owner can be less worried about those bring your own device models because there's no enterprise data on them. And B, it's way more cost effective. You don't have to buy the $2,000 business laptop that's got the ability to put it in the Windows domain and all the other fun stuff so you can install the apps, because you're not going to install the applications on that desktop. So you go get a $400 home laptop and use it as an access device. So whether the company provides the laptops or they allow people to bring your own, the cloud desktop model completely changes that dynamic.
Yeah, I guess this is Matt again. I guess that answers it. And then there's a couple of questions here, Rob. In the context of time, we'll just make this the last one. Anyone, if your questions weren't answered today, again, all of Rob's contact information to connect with Avatara, and then Digitek will follow this. Reach out to us and we can get back to you. But there's a few questions here about the first step of getting involved with private cloud. You know, you mentioned a few of the different applications, whether it was the application itself, some email, or maybe the storage of the data itself. What would be, let's call it without knowing the specifics, a generic first step to move forward with a private cloud solution?
So we run into folks all the time that have kind of dipped their toe in the water, and our very direct answer would be don't dip your toe in the water, because what happens is you may solve a small part of your problem, but you've added to your complexity. So for example, all the time we move people back off of Office 365 who were sold by their IT company. Let's start with just your email, right? Well, once you've done that, your email's with Microsoft. Well, then what do you want to do next? Are you going to move your ERP system? Well, Microsoft isn't going to host that. That's going to go somewhere else. You're going to go to an ASP for your CRM. And so the very, very high-level piece of advice I would give folks is you have to look at this holistically. Where do you want to end up when you're done? Because if you start piecemealing it out, one part at a time, the security, the backup, you're going to end up with a piecemeal system that's very complicated to unravel. And you actually, though you may feel like you're solving parts of your problem, you're not really changing the whole problem, which is this very disaggregated set of components that all need to be working to make your IT system. So our view is take a look at it holistically, find somebody that can address the entire IT problem for you, and get it off your plate so that you as a business are focused on the things that are strategic to you, the next manufacturing machine, getting the next doctor online, getting the next financial advisor online, instead of I'm out of storage, so I got to go deal with my IT company on what my options are for more storage. And so, so be aware of the fact that though it may seem simple to peel off little pieces and hand them out, it doesn't actually solve the bigger problem, and in the end it makes it more complicated because now you've got to deal with more vendors.
Yep, makes sense to me. Rob, I can't thank you enough for your time today. I was really interested, really looking forward to this. Obviously, it reminds me of where and how our industry is trending and why getting into managed IT is more and more important because it's important to our customers. I guess a lot of the takeaways for me from the call, Rob, were kind of the catch-22 about managed IT, which is everybody, the client itself, the SMB out there, they do want access to that enterprise-level IT infrastructure, and they do want access to that C-level Fortune 100 high-end talent that manages that system for them to keep up to date on all the softwares, all the upgrades, the infrastructure itself. So, our channel itself, we're tangled with that, how to get into it, how to provide that enterprise-level customer experience at an affordable basis within our means, within our talent, within our technology. And it's kind of how we created Partner Pro, right? Like, it's bringing in the right partners, the right resources, the right technology, companies like Avatara, outside of the four walls of your organization today to get in that expertise talent. Rob's experience itself, 25 years in the industry doing this, billions of dollars in revenue. It's having that type of partnership with your program and your company to move forward. For any information about Digitek or Avatara, please let's see the contact information up on the screens. As far as the Amazon gift card, the winner was, I hope I pronounced this right, Gerald Rolnick from Positively Web. Gerald, you'll see a contact email come out to you from Digitek with access to the Amazon e-gift card. Everybody on the call, thank you for your time today. Rob, it was fantastic. All your contact information, we'll be recording this and sending it out. So if you have anyone else in your company or maybe a potential client that you're interested in discussing cloud services or private cloud with, you'll be able to send them the recording. Other than that, everybody, thank you very much, and we look forward to talking to you next month on our Continued Thought Leadership series. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.